Welcome to this edition of the Golden Rule. I am so excited about this program because I have with me today a friend from Colombia, South America, a missionary named Russel Stendal. Russell, thank you.
Glad to be here, Barry.
Yeah, it's very spontaneous. He just breezed through the area, and I figured I got Raina together and said, can we do this? Because I don't want to miss an opportunity like this. But I first met Russell probably 40 years ago down in Bradenton, Florida at Christian Retreat. And we've been in relationship ever since, and it's been just a joy. We don't spend a whole lot of time together, but the times we do spend are rich. And so I want to let him share with you how he and his family ended up becoming missionaries. Because, and the specific point I want to emphasize, which you'll pick up on, obviously, is how God can use a child to speak His will into a life of a whole family. So Russell, take it away.
Well, when I was growing up, my parents didn't believe in miracles. They believed we were in what they called the dispensation of the silence of God, and they believed all the Bible stories, and they believed all, prophetically that Jesus was coming back and all kinds of wonderful things were going to happen in the future, but that God really couldn't speak to people or do miracles today. Mm-hmm. And so that began to change, though. My grandmother gave me a plant that was supposed to have some beautiful red flowers on it, and I think they were azaleas. And so my dad asked me to pray one morning at the breakfast table, and we were on our way to church. It was Sunday. And so I prayed and thanked the Lord for the breakfast, and then added, and would you please let there be red flowers on my plant by the time we come home from church? And my dad had been all happy, this little kid's coming to know about God, and he's wanting to commit his life to the Lord, and now his little faith is just going to be dashed because there won't be, it's impossible for this to happen. So he didn't bring us straight home from church. He fooled around, when we went out to eat ice cream, this and that, and we got to go home because I want to see the red flowers on my plant, and so. Finally, he takes us home, and that plant, you couldn't even hardly see the green leaves for all the red flowers on it.
Oh, man.
And there hadn't even been any buds on it before we left for church.
Kind of like Aaron's rod budding, almost.
Yeah. And even after that, my dad said, don't tell that story because people are going to think we're a bunch of blooming idiots. But anyway, it's a true story. So then I was 4, and he wanted to teach me about foreign missions. So he's left his engineering job. He was the project engineer on the big lock and dam at St. Anthony Falls in the Twin Cities, and bought a picture book about how the Indians lived in the Andes Mountains in South America, and proceeded to open this book and show it to me, but he got the wrong book. It wasn't National Geographic style beautiful pictures. It was a Life magazine freelance photographer, and it was called The Awakening Valley, and it showed the raw reality of how the people lived. Cool. The poverty, the drunkenness, the bloody machete fights, the hunger, the child abuse, the absolute total despair of those people. Mm. And so when Dad realized he had the wrong book, he's trying to get it shut, and he's trying to get rid of it, and I'm trying to pry it open and see the rest of the pictures, and I'm shocked, And so I said, why do they live like that? And so my dad said, well, Russ, I guess they don't know any better. And so I said, well, why don't they know any better? I was getting upset about this. Mm. And Dad said, well, no one's ever gone to share the gospel of Jesus Christ with those people. Well, why hasn't anyone gone? And Dad said, well, Russ, I guess no one really cares about those people. No one loves them enough to go share the gospel with them. Mm. And I turned around on his lap, I looked him square in the eye, I said, but you care, don't you, Dad?
Oh.
And he said, yes, son, I care. And so I said, why don't we go help them? I meant, we better get going tomorrow because it looks like they really need help pretty bad, So I couldn't get a straight answer out of him. He started to hem and haw about why we couldn't go help those people. Mm-hmm. He said, you can't just take off for South America. That would be missionary work. And in order to be a missionary, God would have to call you. And God would have to open the doors, and God would have to provide the finances, and God would have to do this, and God would have to... He blamed it all on God. Those poor people on there had never heard about the gospel. And then he said, maybe when you grow up, you can be a missionary. Which is, this had been the plan of the whole thing, to bind the book. And... but I wasn't getting I was an impatient little kid, and I wasn't getting,
the answer
I wasn't. He wasn't answering my question. But he had been teaching me to pray every night before going to bed. So I climbed off his lap, or sitting in the sofa, knelt beside the sofa, prayed in a loud voice, loud enough for my mother to hear in the kitchen. Dear God, please call my parents to be missionaries, so I won't have to wait till I grow up. Trotted off to bed. And my mom said afterwards, when she heard that little prayer, she thought, oh no, that one's going to be answered. And it was.
Oh man, 4 years old, drops down on his knees and says, God, call my parents to be missionaries. And he did then. So how did that play out?
By the time I was 8 years old, we were in Colombia, South America as missionaries, working with tribal groups just like what had been in that picture book.
Share some of your experiences.
Well, the people, were dead set against the outside world. They would poison any outsider that came in, or any of their own people that would share any information on their language or culture with an outsider. These were Stone Age tribal people. And but they didn't feel threatened by us little kids. So they received us kids, and they didn't receive my parents at the beginning. But there's a place in the gospel where Jesus says, if you even receive this child in my name, you receive me. And if you receive me, you receive my Father who sent me. Yeah. And so we got received as little kids, and God got his foot in the door. And
how did you end up with the Kogis?
Well, that's how it happened. On the first flight into the tribe, where we didn't know how things were going to go, they put my brother, who was younger than me, and left him with one of the Indians, and they thought, the plane's going to take 10 or 15 minutes to go back, and then another 10 or 15 minutes to get back. Well, the plane broke down, and they couldn't move that airplane for a week. And of course my mom was going nuts, because she's got a 8-year-old, left alone in a hostile village. Yeah. But when they finally got there, my brother was sitting beside the chief and the chief's best friend, and everything was just fine. And he'd unpacked the duffel bags that had been left there, and found a shotgun, went out and with the Indians shot some wild turkeys, and everybody was having a feast, and they were.
I want you to back up, and I don't know if I'm going to put you on the spot by this, but there were some dreams involved before you went to Colombia, were there not?
Yes.
Do you recall any of the details about somebody seeing a little native?
Well, that was a pastor and his wife in Everett, Washington.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
And the Lord showed him in advance, about the Kogi tribe, and to pray, and gave him prophetic messages, and all came true. So
what was their connection with your father?
We didn't know him. We didn't know them at all. They were total strangers to us. That we met them 5 years later when we came back on furlough and brought one of the Indians.
Oh, I see.
And then we heard all this, And they'd been praying for us for these 5 years and never met us personally.
So you had an experience as a prisoner of the communist tribe people down there. Just introduce that briefly.
Okay, well, Colombia has gone through a civil war that lasted from 1964 until 2016. And still isn't totally over, because there's some guerrilla groups and some dissidents that are still fighting. And our family arrived in Colombia about the time this war got formalized. We arrived in January, the war got formalized in May. And of course, many pastors were murdered, many missionaries were kidnapped, some were killed. Millions of Christians were displaced, and even today Colombia has more displaced persons than any other country in the world, because of all the people fleeing hunger in Venezuela right now. And so in 1983, I was kidnapped by the rebel forces and held hostage for 5 months. That after praying intensely for 6 months that God would send them the gospel.
So he answered your prayer.
Yes, he did.
Just the way you wanted it.
Yeah.
So you spent 5 months as a prisoner. And what was your relationship with your guards or with your captors?
Well, at first they wouldn't let me, speak, and they said, take this notebook and doodle, because if you talk to us, we're all going to get in trouble. But then what I wrote in the notebook was interesting, but it was in English, and they didn't. Almost none of them knew any English, and they couldn't read my handwriting. But I was writing about them, and I'd write their names really nice and clear, and they became overcome with curiosity. So the leader brought, and they allowed the ropes to be lengthened a little bit, and they made a desk and sat me down there, still tied up, but at this desk. And then they brought in an old manual typewriter that they found someplace and ordered me to type this out in Spanish so they could see what I had written. Well, and then I had him. It was like playing Arabian Nights. And so I wrote a book that later got published called Rescue the Captors. And the end of the part that I wrote there in the guerrilla camp, which ended in chapter 10, gives a real clear presentation of the gospel for them. And many responded.
Before I forget it, it just popped in my head. I want you to give the viewing audience some information as to how they can contact you or get more information about your ministry. Is there an email or a website or whatever?
Yeah, if you look on any, well, first of all, if you Google my name, Russel Stendal, with 2 S's and 2 L's in Russell, and no H in Stendal, you'll find a lot of interesting stuff. Okay. Including links to all the books that I've written, videos. There's a YouTube channel called Russel Stendal. Our company, publishing company, Ransom Press International, has a website. You can download our Bibles and books and materials. The SOM, Spirit of Martyrdom website, the Pan America Mission, the CPC Canada Society website. This is another group that I started. And if you want the printed books, since there's so many of them, and we can't keep them in inventory because we spend our money printing stuff in Spanish and giving it away on the mission field, but you can get them from Amazon.com. You can get ebooks, free download on Google Books. You can get them on iTunes. You can get them on just about any platform. You can get them for Kindle. You can get print on demand from Amazon.
I don't know how you do any of that stuff, but I hope you can get something from that, because you're going to want to especially read that book, Rescue the Captors. It's an awesome book. Well,
yeah, we've gone through close to 500,000 copies in English and Spanish. A lot of them given away in missionary endeavors and mass evangelism in Colombia and Venezuela, even Cuba.
Oh, you got stories to tell about Cuba, don't you, too? And sailboats and airplanes and pigs.
Well, what's really going on now is Venezuela. There's a huge revival going on in Venezuela right now.
Really?
Yeah. And a lot of our role in this revival has been just to try and serve people, and the biggest need that they have right now is Bibles in Venezuela. Mm. So people started having dreams and seeing visions in Venezuela. And Christians and non-Christians, communists, socialists, guerrillas, you name it. I don't know how many people have had the same dream or vision. Some of them see it one way or some see it another way.
Really?
But they're crying out because of, people are starving to death over there right now. It's been devastated. The economy is totally destroyed.
Weren't they a very wealthy country?
Yes. One of the 8th most wealthy country in the world in per capita income. Now they're in the bottom 8, and they managed to accomplish this in 20 years.
How? What happened?
Well, it was a Marxist socialist plan to take over the country, destroy everything, and then rebuild a Marxist socialist utopia.
Oh, so communism took over, basically.
Yes. And the first part of the plan worked marvelously. They managed to destroy capitalism totally. Mm-hmm. And but once they got that wiped out, they couldn't get it restarted again. They couldn't get their economy restarted.
So people are fleeing Venezuela?
Millions and millions of people.
Wow.
But the Christians didn't flee, because the people that are fleeing are able-bodied people between about 15 years old and 50. And they leave the children and the elderly to fend for themselves and starve to death, and they take off and try and get out of there and walk for days or weeks or months. But the real Christians stay and try and take care of the children and the elderly. And so the average pastor spends his time trying to convince somebody in his congregation who may not have enough resources to eat 2 meals a day, would you be willing to just eat 1 meal a day so that somebody else who has no meals a day can at least have 1 meal a day?
Wow.
That's about 90% of the job of an average pastor in many areas in Venezuela today. It's starting to get a little better, but so anyway, these people are crying out to God, and they have these dreams and visions. And in it, God talks to them and says, I'm going to restore my blessing on the nation of Venezuela.
Oh, praise God.
And the sign is, I'm sending you the Bible.
Oh.
And then they see the Bible in their dream or in their vision. And the Bible that they see isn't just any Bible, it's the Bibles that we're providing. The exact Bible. And so when we come in with that Bible, they burst into tears. And many times I get down on their knees and start repenting, even if they were non-Christians and saw this, even Marxist communist guerrillas, and start helping us with the Bible distribution. And so we've been able to put over 300,000 Bibles and New Testaments into Venezuela over the last couple of years. But we think the need is 3 million instead of 300,000.
If you've got some money, Bibles for Venezuela, you can use some help. Well, Russell, we're out of time for this session. Can you do another one?
Sure.
Okay. He's going to do another one. It may not be back to back, but he will be on again. So thank you again for tuning in today. And remember, live a righteous life. You'll love it. God will love it. Devil will hate it, but that's okay. We hate him too.